Thursday, September the 7th, 1780, there was a funeral in Jamaica for a 20-year-old man by the name of John Thistlewood. Those who attended represented a cross-section of Jamaican society. There were the slave-owning planter friends of John's father, Thomas Thistlewood, John's free apprentice comrades, and the enslaved friends of his black mother, Phoebe. John Thistlewood was the son of a female slave fathered by a white overseer, Thomas, who bought his freedom at 2 years old, and had he not died of a fever, would have inherited his own slaves and estate in Jamaica, becoming one of the mulatto elite on the island. His father, Thomas, originally from England, was infamous for being a violent overseer, fond of brutalizing slaves, man, woman, young or old. He was also known for the many black mistresses he had. Thomas Thistlewood developed a special relationship with a house slave named Phoebe, to the point where they took care of one another when the other was sick, loaned each other money, and spent weekends together whenever they had time off from the plantation. From this union, John was born. Phoebe gained favor and authority in the racial matrix of 18th century Jamaica, to the point where Thomas couldn't do whatever he wanted with her. Even so, overseers and slave owners were expected to engage in sexual relationships with female slaves. Though it was scandalous back in Europe, it was the norm in the so-called New World. Through all the justifications of slavery and ideas of racial hierarchy, somehow the women were good enough to create children and some sort of relationship with. William Henry Harrison, the 9th president of the United States, had 10 children with his wife Anna, but at least 6 with one of his slaves, Dilcia. He wound up selling many to a plantation owner in Georgia so as to have a clean slate to run for president. In fact, his great-grandson was Walter Francis White, who led the NAACP for over 20 years. In January of 1868, the government of Arkansas convened to draft a new state constitution, and with the new rights granted to recently freed slaves, there was a fear that blacks would try to encroach on white society. James T. White, one of the black delegates at the convention, stated in response, "Who is to blame for this present state of affairs? When I look around, I see an innumerable company of mulattoes, not one of them the heir of a white woman." The late Strom Thurmond, once governor of South Carolina and eventually became one of the longest-serving senators in U.S. history, was a staunch and unapologetic segregationist, having only passed in 2003. He is noted for having the longest filibuster by one man in opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Upon his death, it was found that he fathered a daughter with a black woman. No one can really classify these relationships as love due to the lack of equality. But through the racism and posturing for the public, miscegenation was an ingrained part of the culture. One may deduce it was all about oppression, which had its merits, but power and control wasn't the totality of it. History shows at first sight, Europeans considered dark skin beautiful. Richard Legion, a British author who eventually sailed to Barbados in the 1640s to buy a plantation, left a detailed account of his first impressions of the island, and among them, noted his appreciation for the beauty, shape, stature, and color of the newly arrived Africans, male and female alike. The 18th century German physician and anthropologist Johann Blumenbach was one of the creators of race as we know it, was astounded by the loveliness of a black woman he observed in Switzerland, saying she was a Negro woman so beautiful to fall in love with. Is this saying the long history of abuse of black women somehow validates brown skin is attractive? Of course not. But it highlights the clear contradiction of what was propagated years later versus the reality that no one found African features aesthetically inferior. Then why is it, among black people themselves, that dark skin, sadly, is near demonized? Many won't admit it, but phrases like "she's pretty for a dark girl" say what one actually thinks of where they came from. Why is it that so many melanated people hate the skin they're in, when even their oppressors didn't? Why is straight hair considered good hair and anything else undesirable? Why has the media for so long portrayed the European-centric phenotype as the standard of beauty when it was revealed in practice to be a lie? In 1970, the text of a speech given in 1712 by a Virginian slave owner named Willie Lynch was publicized, and it eventually became known as the Willie Lynch Letter. In it, he specifies how to control a slave population with a minimal use of violence. Some feel today that the text of this speech was a hoax due to the verbiage that is inconsistent with the vocabulary of the time, but either way, what was revealed in the text summarizes how plantations, in fact, were run across South America, the Caribbean, and the United States, which cannot be denied. In the speech, Lynch talked about exploiting the differences between slaves to make them enemies of one another, among them being age, color and shade, intelligence, size, sex, size of plantation they worked on, whether they lived in the valley or on a hill, east, west, north, south, whether they had fine hair or coarse hair, whether they were tall or short. These differences were exploited across 2 continents, making slaves see their peers as rivals and striving to be higher than one another, denigrating those their owners didn't favor, and all the while forgetting they were all slaves and the owner and overseers were the enemy. Inside of this mental manipulation, house slave versus field slave was born. Light skin versus dark skin, good hair versus nappy hair, and all manner of self-shaming and elitism mushroomed among those in bondage. To be lighter was valued among slaves because the slave owner knew he had to keep them separate, not because he actually thought light skin was more attractive, which had been proven time and time again throughout history. European looks and cultural mores were put on a pedestal to give the enslaved masses a goal to strive for that would permanently keep them feeling inadequate, with only the hope of being to be as much like your master as you could. With this level of brainwashing, even when freed, earning lots of money or gaining a seat in the realm of politics with an enslaved mind, one would only support the status quo and merely be a visual example to those who wanted to believe all things were possible. It only looks like progress, but in reality, it is the plantation system perpetuating itself time and time again. So the question is, when you look in the mirror, do you like what you see? If not, why not? Who convinced you that you weren't stunningly gorgeous or handsome beyond all imagination? Whether you're light, dark, or somewhere in between, whether you were born rich or poor, slim or not, no matter the shade of your eyes, color, or texture of your hair, if you're tall or short, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the way you were born. We are all worthy of respect and love, and in mass believing that perfection is in your natural self and not what comes over the media. It's a danger to the current power structure, hence there is a multi-pronged attack against it. It is past time to get over colorism like light skin against dark skin, to be free of mental enslavement, and to realize to change the world you cannot accept all of its broadcasted norms. Colonialism has to die. The time is now.